how bad would you say, because as long as you've been a journalist, would you say that the Israel lobby's control over our government has always been this bad, or do you think it's accelerated over the last few years, especially because of what's been happening over the last 2 years in particular?
So I've actually been fortunate to have never covered Israel and Palestine. Never got assigned to it, so it's not a particular area of expertise of mine. It came up a little bit recently, and I think, you talk about, is it Miriam Adelson behind the bombing of the Houthis? I don't know. I can imagine that there might be some other people who'd be interested in those trade routes, but the speech thing, absolutely, right? So the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, the 2019 executive order that Trump signed, where they used the anti-Semitism definition by the IHCA, the International Holocaust for,
and the guy who wrote it has even come out and said it's not appropriate in this instance. Like, he even came out and said, like, this is not what that was about. Yeah,
he said it's not supposed to be a speech code.
Yeah,
and it's being used as a speech code, and so they did that. Then they have the new executive order, and the problem with it, and this, I think, is, among other things, kind of an intellectual problem in the Republican Party. Like, I just don't think some of them understand the law here, and so there are members within the Republican Party who saw that there was a huge political opportunity in the last 2 or 3 years on the speech question. J.D. Vance is, I think, an example of somebody who decided to make an issue out of censorship, and saw that the Democrats were vulnerable there, and talked about it a lot. But when they turn right around and essentially enact a version of the same kinds of hate speech laws that they're decrying in Europe, which is what the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act and those executive orders are. It's totally against the First Amendment what they're doing. We already have laws against discrimination, but they're adding a definition of anti-Semitism that could easily include legal speech. So the executive order, I think, is illegal. If it ever got to the Supreme Court, I think even this Supreme Court would probably shoot it down. But the Republican Party loves the fact that it's owned the speech issue for the last few years. To see them turn around and just sort of give it away again over this issue tells you a lot about how powerful that lobby is. Either there's a lack of understanding, or there's just an enormous amount of influence there. And my understanding is that it's more the latter.
Yeah.
Have you spoken with Whitney Webb, and have you read One Nation Under Blackmail?
I talked to Whitney once, but no, this isn't my bailiwick at all. So
no, I totally understand. I think because now we're at a point where we're asking a lot of questions, and we should be asking a lot of questions, because the saber rattling is getting so dangerous. And I know people are just, no, it won't. Trump has already gone completely back on his word regarding being a peace president. There is no peace if you're bombing Yemen. There is no peace if you have now started bombing Gaza all over again. And apparently the bombing of Gaza has now ramped up to an 11. Like, they're just going full bore to completely destroy the entire area and commit a complete genocide. We thought that the reaction, especially of the very libertarian faction of the Trump movement, of the MAGA movement, which is really big, we thought for sure that there would be an inflection point, and it looks like there has been, because Thomas Massie is somebody that I think really understands the values of free speech. I think he's maybe the most honest operator in all of politics right now. He really believes in our constitutional rights in a way that even the ones that we would think would be on board with it are still playing partisan politics. Massie doesn't. Like, he honestly will go whichever direction the right answer is on. And I would hope that we could see more of that. But I think Massie also represents a turn that a lot of people in that MAGA movement are looking for, in which they really don't want this war bullshit. Like that's not their jam. They know, especially because a lot of them are veterans, a lot of them may have been in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they know where this is going, and they see the writing on the wall, and they don't want it. And I do think that could be a very powerful off-ramp depending on where things go. How far do you think Trump is going to be willing to take this? At this point, I think we're in a very dangerous position.
I don't know. I think there's an interesting moment here. Like, for instance, you talk about how there are different factions within the MAGA movement, and I was at the Republican convention last year, and due to a couple of bizarre accidents, my podcast partner and I were getting almost minute-to-minute updates about what they were thinking in terms of the choice of running mate. And it came down to Rubio and Vance at the end. And there were a couple of people in the room who were heavily pressing for Vance, whose arguments were essentially, we're going to lose the MAGA base if we are seen to be tied to kind of the old Pentagon military industrial complex types, and aren't seen as more of a grassroots thing. But then there was another faction that was led by like Lindsey Graham and folks like that, and a lot of the people who you're probably focused on, who are very aggressive on the Israel issue. They really wanted Rubio, right? And Trump's family, in the end, chose. It was my understanding that they chose Vance because they thought that overall it would be an easier sell to their base. Whereas the argument for Rubio is that they would get more crossover voters that way. So I think you're right. I think there is a schism within the Trump administration. I think there's a line, a political line, where they probably don't want to cross too much. But I honestly don't know. I mean, Trump is kind of an enigma, even to people who spend a lot of time with him. It's really hard to know exactly why he does things or what he thinks about. And even on this issue, I would have thought he would do the opposite, and he hasn't. So who knows?
I think he's in a pickle in some respects, because he's sort of between his big donors and a whole bunch of his supporters. And a lot of the MAGA base that is America first, they do not want to be supporting these foreign wars and whatever their reasoning is. And those are a lot of his people. So,
Absolutely.
He's sort of in a predicament. And that's why I'm not sure that everything that we're seeing and hearing that is known to us isn't somewhat being counteracted with stuff behind the scenes that isn't known to us. So what might seem like is going this way isn't necessarily going this way. And I agree. I think he's sort of a wild card. Like, we really don't know. But I do appreciate the fact that he's at least having a conversation with Putin. Like, this is how it's supposed to be. And the fact that we went through the last administration without any diplomatic communications with quote unquote adversaries, which I reject that concept, but just that's insane to me. So just the fact that he's at least having discussions with people, I think that's a step up. That's just, my opinion.
You know what's so funny about that? Remember, if we go all the way back to 2007, when at the very beginning of the Democratic primary, before Obama got elected, Obama at the time, this was at the beginning of the campaign, Hillary was the front runner at the time. And there was a debate, I forget where it was, but one of the questions was, would you talk to the heads of, rogue nations like Syria or North Korea or Cuba? And everybody said, no, absolutely not. The United States shouldn't dignify, the Syrians or Assad or whatever. And Obama was the one exception. And he said, what do we have to be afraid of? I'll talk to anybody.
Exactly.
And this was at the time, American liberalism was all for that. I remember thinking, wow, that's a kind of a sensible position. What a nice, refreshing change. And that was a big boost to his campaign. That was one of the reasons why he kind of won over the Democratic electorate at that time. And then something happened to the party in the interim where it became orthodoxy to no longer have that position of we should talk things through, even if we don't agree with people. Like, what do we have to be afraid of? There's no reputational risk for the United States to get in the room with somebody. Like,
Well, diplomacy isn't profitable.
Well, right. There's that. Yeah.